You moisturize every morning, your skin feels soft, and you walk away feeling like you did something good for yourself. Meanwhile, the cellular machinery your skin uses to repair its own barrier is producing fewer protective compounds this month than it did last month. Not entirely because of your age, partly because of what is in the jar. By the end of this, I am going to walk you through something I call the skin debt reset. 3 specific sequence-dependent steps that take under 4 minutes a day, and I am going to explain exactly why most of what the mainstream health and beauty world has told women over 60 about moisturizer is at best incomplete, and in several specific biological ways, actively accelerating the problem it claims to solve. Let me start at the surface and work downward. This is an architecture problem. You need to see the building from the outside in. The top layer of your skin is called the stratum corneum. That sounds like a textbook term, so let's strip it down immediately. It is dead skin cells packed tightly together in approximately 15 to 20 layers, suspended in a matrix of fats called lipids. Think of it as the outer brick wall of a building. The bricks are the dead cells. The mortar holding those bricks together is made of ceramides, fatty acids and cholesterol, not purchased ceramides, not applied ceramides, but ceramides your own body synthesizes on demand. This wall does not just sit there, it actively repairs itself. When it sustains damage from UV radiation, cold air, friction, or chemical exposure, specialized living cells in the layer immediately beneath it, called keratinocytes, ramp up production of tiny lipid packets called lamellar bodies. These are secreted into the spaces between the dead skin cells, essentially patching the mortar from below. It is an automated maintenance crew that reads damage and responds to it without any instruction from you. Now here is where the story starts to diverge from what most people have been told. In research published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, Dr. Peter Elias and his team at the University of California, San Francisco spent decades studying what happens to this repair process when the skin surface is covered by an occlusive material, meaning a product that forms a film on the surface and reduces transepidermal water loss, which is simply the rate at which water escapes through your skin into the air. What they found is that occlusion signals the skin that the barrier is already intact. The lamellar body secretion drops significantly. The maintenance crew stands down. The practical consequence is specific and important. When you apply a product that seals moisture into the skin's surface, your skin interprets that as barrier complete, no action required. The product wears off over 6 to 8 hours. The crew that should have been working during those hours was idle. Do this every day for months and then for years, and you are chronically suppressing the very system responsible for keeping your barrier healthy, independently of any product. This is what I mean by skin debt. You are borrowing hydration from an external source while your skin's own production infrastructure slowly declines from lack of use. The surface feels fine, the capacity underneath is eroding. Now let us go one level deeper, because something is happening in the mortar itself that makes this significantly worse, and it is happening because of a chemistry problem most people have never heard of. Ceramides are a family of lipid molecules that make up approximately 50% of the stratum corneum's total lipid content. They are the primary structural compound in that mortar between your skin cells. Without adequate ceramides, the wall develops microscopic gaps. Water escapes at an accelerated rate. Irritants, allergens, and microorganisms that a healthy barrier would simply block begin to penetrate. The skin becomes what dermatologists call reactive, responding with low-grade inflammation to stimuli that well-functioning skin would ignore entirely. Ceramide levels are already declining naturally after 50. Research published in the British Journal of Dermatology found that ceramide concentrations in the stratum corneum dropped by roughly 30 to 40% between the 40s and the early 60s. That is a meaningful structural decline happening in the background, regardless of what products you are or are not using. But here is the piece of information that is almost never discussed outside of specialist dermatology literature. a class of ingredients found in the vast majority of commercially sold body lotions and face creams called synthetic emulsifiers, can actively extract ceramides from the stratum corneum during the act of applying the product. Let me explain emulsifiers specifically, because this is the mechanism everything else hinges on. Emulsifiers are the chemistry that keeps water and oil blended together in a cream instead of separating the way salad dressing does when it sits. Without emulsifiers, a product is either pure oil or pure water, neither of which spreads easily or feels pleasant on skin. This means every major body lotion, face cream, or anything that comes in a pump or tub and feels both smooth and hydrating uses emulsifiers. They are functionally unavoidable in this product format. The problem is that emulsifiers are amphiphilic by chemical design. They are attracted to both water and fat simultaneously. When you rub a lotion containing certain emulsifiers into your skin, those molecules do not stay neatly in the product film. They penetrate partially into the stratum corneum. And because they are attracted to fat, and because your stratum corneum is approximately 50% fat in the form of ceramides and fatty acids, some emulsifier molecules bind to the lipid structures in your barrier and carry them outward as the water fraction of the cream evaporates. Research published in the journal Skin Pharmacology and Physiology demonstrated measurable reductions in lipid content of the stratum corneum following repeated application of emulsifier-containing formulations. Compounds in the sodium lauryl sulfate family and certain polyethylene glycol derivatives, the PG compounds you see listed as PG40 or PG100 stearate on ingredient lists, were identified as particularly active in this lipid extraction process. The researchers formally described the phenomenon as emulsifier-induced barrier disruption. The sequence plays out like this each morning. You apply the cream, the surface feels immediately hydrated, and a fraction of your natural ceramide mortar has left the building with the product. You do this every day. You may have been doing this for 20 years. The surface feels fine because the product is temporarily replacing what it is also removing. Whether the net effect on your barrier's structural integrity is neutral, positive, or negative depends on whether the formulation is returning more ceramides than the emulsifiers are extracting. And for the majority of products currently on the market at most price points, that math is not clearly in your favor. This is where the mainstream story falls apart, and I think it is worth pausing on exactly how that happened. We have been told by dermatologists, by beauty brands, by women's health media, by essentially the entire mainstream conversation about skin aging, that moisturizing daily is non-negotiable, that dryness is the enemy, that skipping moisturizer causes damage, that the solution to aging skin is more hydration, more consistently applied, with increasingly sophisticated delivery systems. Here is what the clinical research actually shows. Dr. Elias and colleagues developed a framework they called the barrier hypothesis of skin aging, arguing that barrier dysfunction is not merely a symptom of skin aging, but one of its active mechanistic drivers. When the barrier is chronically disrupted, whether from emulsifier-induced ceramide extraction, from physical damage, from surfactant exposure, the inflammatory signal generated at the surface does not stay localized. It cascades downward through every layer of the skin, communicating to the collagen-producing cells in the dermis that damage is occurring. Barrier disruption feeds inflammation. Inflammation feeds collagen breakdown. Collagen breakdown is what most visible skin aging actually is. The crepe texture, the loss of firmness, the thinning, the lines that were not there 3 years ago. The moisturizer industry is not unaware of this research. The response has been to acknowledge the barrier hypothesis and market against it with remarkable efficiency, which is precisely why you now see the words barrier repair, ceramide infused, and microbiome friendly on the front of products that still contain the same emulsifiers and fragrance compounds responsible for the barrier disruption problem in the first place. The ceramide in the formula is replacing the ceramide the formula helped remove. I want you to hold that sentence for a moment, because it is not a conspiracy, it is just how a product category behaves when there is no financial incentive to solve the root problem permanently, because solving it permanently means selling you significantly less product, not more. Now let us go deeper into the building, past the bricks, past the mortar, into the living floors below. Just above and within the outer layers of your skin lives a complex community of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, and viruses, collectively called the skin microbiome. Approximately 1 million organisms per square centimetre on most body surfaces, significantly denser in moist areas and skin folds. These are not invaders. They are residents that co-evolved with human skin biology over hundreds of thousands of years and carry out specific necessary functions. Staphylococcus epidermidis, one of the dominant species in a healthy skin microbiome, produces compounds that actively suppress more pathogenic bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus, which is the organism associated with eczema flares and skin infections. Certain Cutibacterium species help regulate the pH of the skin surface, which sits naturally at around 4.5 to 5 on the pH scale, mildly acidic, deliberately so. That acidity suppresses the growth of inflammation-triggering organisms and maintains the activity of the skin's own barrier repair enzymes, which require an acidic pH environment to function correctly. When the pH rises toward neutral, as it does after washing with alkaline products or after applying high pH formulations, the barrier repair enzyme activity drops and the population balance of the microbiome shifts. Now here is what fragrance does to this ecosystem, and the effect is more specific than most people realize. Fragrance is the single most common cause of allergic contact dermatitis in adults, according to the American Contact Dermatitis Society. But the more insidious effect operates well below the threshold of a visible allergic reaction. Common fragrance terpene compounds, limonene, linalool, geraniol, eugenol, carry documented antimicrobial properties. Applied twice daily to your skin surface, they function as mild, low-dose topical antibiotics targeting the very organisms that live there. The intended purpose is to smell pleasant. The collateral biological effect is a selective pressure on your microbiome that shifts population balance in ways that favor inflammation. In a healthy, resilient microbiome, this disruption would be temporary and self-correcting. But after 60, when skin immune surveillance is already slower, when ceramide levels are already declining, and when the microbiome is already less diverse than it was at 40, the population does not rebound as quickly from repeated perturbation. The daily shifts accumulate over weeks and months. The species that regulate inflammation are reduced. The species that generate inflammatory signals gain ground. The consequence is a state of persistent low-grade skin inflammation, too subtle to see clearly, too consistent to ignore at the cellular level. You would not describe your skin as inflamed. You might describe it as reactive, uneven, a little tight after washing, occasionally sensitive to products that never bothered you before. That reactivity is the inflammation presenting through the vocabulary available to your senses. This pattern has a formal name in the science of aging. It is called inflammaging, a compound of inflammation and aging first formally described in research by Dr. Claudio Francesi at the University of Bologna in the early 2000s. The core thesis is that chronic low-grade inflammation is not just a side effect of growing older, it is one of its primary biological mechanisms. It accelerates cellular senescence, degrades tissue architecture, shortens telomeres, and drives the collagen loss that anti-aging skincare products claim to prevent. In the skin specifically, the daily application of fragranced emulsifier-heavy products is one of the most consistent environmental contributors to this inflammatory state in women over 60. The invisible villain has been sitting on your bathroom shelf. Let us now go one level deeper into the living epidermis, where the cells that will eventually become your outer wall are being manufactured. Keratinocytes are the cells that divide continuously in the deepest layer of the epidermis, then migrate upward over weeks, flattening and losing their nucleus as they go, eventually becoming the dead cornicytes of your stratum corneum. The rate at which this migration completes is called epidermal turnover time. In your 30s, it averages approximately 28 days. By your 60s, it has slowed to between 55 and 75 days, depending on the individual. The manufacturing conveyor belt has dropped to roughly half its previous speed. Part of this deceleration is hormonal. Estrogen directly regulates keratinocyte proliferation and epidermal turnover rate. The sharp decline in estrogen following menopause is one of the primary biological reasons skin texture, tone, and structural thickness change so noticeably in the decade after the transition. Research published in Maturitas, a journal focused specifically on postmenopausal biology, found that skin collagen content declines by approximately 30% in the first 5 years following menopause, a rate that then slows but never stops. The hormonal environment has fundamentally changed, and the skin's structural architecture is responding to that change whether you are aware of it or not. But here is what is happening at the level of the keratinocytes themselves, in the context of the moisturizer problem, and this is a mechanism that almost nobody explains. Keratinocytes are not just passive workers on a manufacturing line. They are also the production facilities for something called the natural moisturizing factor, a collection of water-attracting molecules, including free amino acids, pyrrolidone, carboxylic acid, uracanic acid, and various sugars produced as a byproduct of the breakdown of a protein called filaggrin as cells mature and migrate upward. These compounds do not sit on the surface of your skin. They live inside and between the upper skin cells, drawing water inward from below, keeping the stratum corneum hydrated from the inside out. This is why healthy young skin stays hydrated in cold, dry conditions with no product at all. It is not genetics. It is active, ongoing biochemistry that your skin is performing constantly. When the outer surface is chronically covered with mineral oil, petrolatum, silicone, or heavy synthetic emollient films, the internal signal to produce natural moisturizing factor is partially inhibited. The skin reads the surface environment as adequately hydrated and reduces the metabolic investment in building its own internal hydration infrastructure. It is the biological equivalent of a warehouse that stops ordering raw materials because the loading dock is already full. When the product wears off, the warehouse has nothing to ship. The skin feels urgent, desperate dryness, not because it is inherently dry, but because the internal supply chain has been standing down. That dryness is then interpreted, entirely reasonably, as proof that more moisturizer is needed. It is actually evidence that the skin's own production capacity has been chronically suppressed. The product is maintaining the deficit it presents itself as solving. And I say this not with outrage, but with the specific weariness of someone who spent years buying the narrative before she read the mechanism. Before I give you the steps of the skin debt reset, I want to be honest about something that is relevant to why this kind of information rarely makes it into a consistent habit. I had read most of this before I made any real changes. I had the Elias barrier research bookmarked. I knew what PEG emulsifiers were and how they worked. I had the JAMA oxybenzone study open in a tab for weeks. And I was still using the same fragrance body lotion I had been using for 6 years because it felt good, I liked the smell, and I had not built any alternative into an actual daily routine. Knowing the mechanism and changing the behavior are, as it turns out, two genuinely different cognitive tasks. My husband is the one who actually sat down and made something I could follow without relitigating the decision every morning. He had spent years applying the same systematic approach to health that had helped rebuild his own biology after his aneurysm, when the doctors gave him a prescription stack for the rest of his life, and we started actually learning how the body works after 50, rather than how the medical system manages it. He built the Noon Reset Protocol as a 30-day daily companion, 2 pages a day, 1 page of the science behind what you are doing and why, 1 page of practical tracking. The adaptation phase in the first 10 days is designed around removing interference before adding anything new, which is exactly the audit logic I am describing here. He also mapped out 25 breakfast meal ideas with exact protein counts, because timing and protein composition at your first meal of the day affects downstream inflammatory markers more than most people realize, and after 50 that connection is significantly tighter. If you want to look at it, it is through the link in the description. Less than a single bottle of the lotion I have spent the last 20 minutes explaining the problems with. Now let us go into the dermis, because this is where everything we have discussed converges into a specific structural consequence. The dermis is the thick layer of connective tissue beneath the epidermis. It contains your collagen, the structural protein that gives skin its thickness, its resistance to wrinkling, and its overall density. It contains elastin, the protein that allows skin to snap back after being pressed or stretched. And it is home to fibroblasts, the cells that manufacture both. Fibroblasts are long-lived, slow-cycling cells. They are the skilled craftspeople of your skin's structural layer, and they are responsive to signals coming from above them. Collagen production peaks in the mid-20s and then declines at approximately 1% per year after 30. By 60, your skin has potentially lost between 25 and 30% of its peak collagen density. Elastin is barely synthesized in adult skin at all. You are largely living off the elastin you produced before the age of 20. Once elastin is degraded beyond a critical threshold, the snapback quality does not return. Here is the precise mechanism by which surface inflammation reaches this layer and accelerates the structural loss. Every time the skin's barrier is disrupted, through emulsifier-induced ceramide extraction, through microbiome destabilization, through fragrance triggering a surface immune response, the keratinocytes release inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines downward into the dermis. The primary actors are interleukin-1 alpha and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These compounds reach the fibroblasts and activate a class of enzymes called matrix metalloproteinases, abbreviated MMPs. Matrix metalloproteinases are enzymes that degrade collagen and other structural proteins. They exist for legitimate reasons. They help remodel tissue after injury, assist in wound closure, participate in normal cell turnover. But when MMP activity is chronically elevated because of persistent inflammatory signaling from above, they break down collagen at a rate that exceeds what the fibroblasts can replace. The net result over months and years is progressive thinning of the dermis, which presents at the surface as the crepe texture along the arms, the loss of jaw definition, the vertical lines above the lip, the hollowing beneath the eyes. Visible aging is largely collagen architecture losing a slow daily war against MMP activity, and a significant share of the inflammatory signal driving that MMP activity may be coming from the very products applied in the name of anti-aging. There is one more layer I need to address before giving you the protocol, because it is the layer most skin aging content completely avoids. Some of what you apply to your skin after 60 does not stay on your skin. A 2019 study published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, tested the systemic absorption of 4 common chemical UV filters: oxybenzone, octinoxate, octocrylene, and avobenzone. After a single day of application following standard sunscreen use guidelines, all 4 compounds were measurable in the bloodstream at concentrations exceeding the 1 nanogram per milliliter threshold that the FDA requires to trigger additional safety investigation. Oxybenzone and octinoxate were still detectable in the blood 7 days after subjects stopped applying sunscreen entirely. The study authors were from the FDA itself. This does not mean sunscreen is dangerous. The researchers said this directly, and I want to say it directly as well. What it means is that the assumption that topical products are entirely local, that they sit on the surface, do their work there and go no further, is factually incorrect for at least some commonly used cosmetic compounds. Oxybenzone in particular has been identified in multiple independent analyses as a potential endocrine disruptor, meaning it may interact with hormone receptor pathways in ways that are not fully characterized. For women over 60, where the hormonal environment is already significantly altered by the postmenopausal estrogen decline, and where estrogen is directly involved in skin barrier integrity, epidermal turnover, and inflammatory regulation, the question of repeated systemic exposure to a compound with possible hormone receptor activity is worth examining carefully, not with panic, with the same clear-eyed practicality you would apply to reading any nutrition label once you know what you are looking for. Mineral-based sunscreens using zinc oxide or titanium dioxide, which work by physically reflecting UV rather than chemically absorbing it, have not shown systemic absorption in equivalent research. They are heavier in texture. The biological trade-off is worth knowing about. Now, the 3 steps of the skin depth reset. The first step is the barrier audit. Pull every product you apply to your face and body regularly. Check the ingredient list for 3 specific categories. First, any ingredient beginning with PAG followed by a number, PAG 40, PAG 100, PAG 7 glycerol cocoate. These are polyethylene glycol emulsifiers associated with ceramide extraction and measurable barrier disruption in repeated application studies. Second, sodium lauryl sulfate or sodium laureth sulfate, sulfate-based surfactants that are among the most well-documented barrier disruptors in cosmetic chemistry literature, still present in many mid-range and pharmacy formulations. Third, the word fragrance or parfum anywhere in the list. Under United States labeling law, fragrance is classified as a trade secret, meaning a company may include dozens or hundreds of individual compounds under that single word without disclosing them individually. You cannot assess what you are applying. That alone is a reason to treat the category differently. If your product contains one or more of these categories, that is information, not a verdict. You now know what you have been working with. The second step is the lipid bridge. When selecting replacement products, prioritize 4 specific compounds. Ceramides in their bioidentical forms, ceramide NP, ceramide AP, and ceramide EOP are the 3 most physiologically relevant and the best studied. Niacinamide at 4 to 10% concentration, linoleic acid and squalane. Niacinamide, the active form of vitamin B3, is the most important of the 4 because of what it does at the cellular level. Research published in the British Journal of Dermatology found that 4% niacinamide applied twice daily for 8 weeks significantly increased ceramide and free fatty acid concentrations in the stratum corneum compared to vehicle control. It achieves this not by depositing ceramide from outside, but by stimulating the keratinocytes themselves to upregulate their own ceramide synthesis. It is not patching the wall, it is telling the workers to resume production. Linoleic acid is an omega-6 essential fatty acid incorporated directly into the lamellar body structures during ceramide synthesis. When linoleic acid is deficient, which is common in postmenopausal skin as sebaceous gland activity declines, the stratum corneum develops structural irregularities that increase its permeability. Topically, it is present in meaningful concentrations in rosehip oil, hemp seed oil, and evening primrose oil used as primary ingredients. Dietary sources, ground flaxseed, hemp seeds, walnuts, contribute as well because the skin's lipid architecture is partly built from what circulates in the bloodstream. Squalane is a saturated derivative of squalene, a compound produced naturally by human sebaceous glands as a component of sebum. It is lightweight, stable, non-comedogenic, and does not trigger the occlusion suppression response that mineral oil and petrolatum do. It mimics the skin's own surface lubricant without signaling the barrier repair crew to stand down. The third step is the repair window. Every evening, leave your skin completely bare, clean, no serum, no oil, no moisturizer, for a minimum of 30 minutes before applying anything. This step has a circadian biology rationale that most skincare discussions skip entirely. The skin, like every organ system, operates on a 24-hour biological clock. Barrier repair activity, specifically lamellar body secretion and the enzymatic processes that resolve daytime inflammatory damage, peaks in the late evening hours. Research in circadian skin biology has identified that the enzymes responsible for ceramide synthesis, particularly serine palmitoyltransferase and the ceramide synthase family, show measurably higher activity in the evening window than during the daytime. This is not random. It is an evolved biological response to a predictable pattern: UV exposure, mechanical friction, and environmental assault during daylight hours, followed by a repair and recovery window at night. When you apply a heavy occlusive or emulsifier-containing product immediately before bed, you are coating the skin surface during the precise window when the lamellar bodies are secreting their repair lipids into that surface. The biological signal fires, the chemistry is in the way. Over time, this consistent interference during the peak repair window contributes to the progressive barrier degradation we have been tracking through every layer of this conversation. 30 bare minutes in the evening, timed with this circadian repair peak, gives the biological process a consistent window to complete. It costs nothing, it requires no product. It is the most counterintuitive step in the protocol because the instinct, especially for postmenopausal skin that tends toward dryness, is to apply more, not to apply nothing. The instinct is wrong in this specific window. One mistake that invalidates this protocol entirely: applying squalane before niacinamide instead of after it. Squalane creates a light lipophilic film on the skin surface that measurably reduces the penetration of water-soluble active compounds applied on top of it. Niacinamide is water-soluble and must reach the keratinocytes in the living epidermis to stimulate ceramide synthesis. If you apply niacinamide after squalane, you are applying an active ingredient on top of a film designed to repel water. The correct sequence every time, without exception, is niacinamide serum first, 2 to 3 minutes for initial absorption, ceramide-containing moisturizer second, squalane only as a final layer if additional emolliency is genuinely needed. Reverse this order and the most important biological step in the protocol does not happen. Now the wider picture, because the skin is not a separate story from everything else. The body after 60 is not deteriorating in a vacuum. It is responding to its environment, and the environment includes what you put on the largest organ you have, repeatedly, in significant quantities every single day. 2 square meters of permeable surface area in constant contact with external chemistry. That chemistry is not neutral. It is either supporting the skin's own biological maintenance machinery or interfering with it. The same logic I just walked you through for skin applies across systems. The gut microbiome is disrupted by synthetic emulsifiers in processed food, specifically polysorbates and carboxymethylcellulose, in a mechanistically similar way to how the skin microbiome is disrupted by cosmetic emulsifiers. The muscle tissue atrophies not because the body forgot how to build it, but because the anabolic signaling pathways have been blunted by insufficient mechanical load and inadequate protein availability. The cardiovascular system accumulates soft plaque, not randomly but through predictable, reversible mechanisms involving oxidized LDL, endothelial inflammation, and chronically elevated insulin. My husband's situation 8 years ago was not a mystery. It was a set of inputs that produced a predictable output. And when we changed the inputs with real medical supervision and over real time with no miracle claims, the outputs changed. The mechanisms work the same direction in both directions. The skin story is the same principle applied to the surface. Your skin has repair mechanisms that are still active. Your lamellae bodies can still secrete. Your keratinocytes can still be stimulated to produce natural moisturizing factor. Your dermal fibroblasts can still receive a less inflammatory signal from above and reduce MMP activity accordingly. The maintenance crew has not quit. It has been told repeatedly by the products on your shelf that its services are not required. What the Skin Debt Reset does is get out of the way long enough to let the crew back in. The barrier audit shows you what is creating the suppression signal. The lipid bridge replaces the interference chemistry with raw materials the skin can actually use, including through niacinamide, a direct upregulation of the skin's own ceramide manufacturing, rather than just an external supply of the finished product. The repair window gives the circadian timed repair cycle a consistent, unobstructed evening slot to operate in. The gap between the available evidence on this and the mainstream conversation about moisturizing aging skin is, when you sit with it, genuinely funny, not funny in an outrageous way. Funny in the way of realizing you have been running a complicated workaround for a problem that was partially created by the workaround itself. The research exists. It is published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology in JAMA and the British Journal of Dermatology. None of it is hidden. It simply does not carry the marketing budget of the $150 billion global skincare market it partially implicates. That is not a conspiracy. That is just an incentive structure behaving exactly the way incentive structures behave. If you are starting the Skin Debt Reset this week, comment "Reset" below so I can see who is actually doing this. And if you want the detailed breakdown of the estrogen-collagen connection, specifically what happens to your skin's structural density in the decade following menopause, and why the dermatological conversation about that rarely includes the barrier biology data, subscribe, because that is exactly what the next one covers.